Well, the 2023 NFL draft is in the books, TJ. I know it didn't play out necessarily how we all saw it going, but any surprises across the NFL? We'll talk about the Lions here in just a minute and what they did in the draft. If we think they're better, if they're worse, what they did with their draft picks and the draft capital that they had. But any giant surprises from you in rounds 1 or 2 early on in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, draft night was the first round at least was certainly a surprise.
It's chaos.
Not only with all the trades and whatnot, but us fans, us outsiders, we get so in tuned with these mock drafts and who Mel Kiper and McShay say are their top 50 guys, and you're like, okay, and you buy into that. But every year, I don't know why we keep getting suckered in, because it never works out that way. There's always picks, that actually come to the NFL draft. There's always teams that obviously their board is completely different than what we think it's going to be. The trade situations, I mean, gosh, there were a ton of them in the first round there, right? Teams moving around, teams moving back, teams moving up. I mean, it was probably the most chaotic first round that I remember watching as a fan. But from the Lions' perspective, look, I thought it was a roller coaster of emotion. It really was. I mean, Thursday night, we're sitting there and we're like, okay, look at all these guys on the board, right? And boom, running back, like, whoa, hold on a minute, right? All we've been hearing about is, Bijan Robinson over the past couple months. Nobody really had Jahmyr Gibbs' name up there. So that was like, all right, a little bit of a head scratcher. And then Jack Campbell, I know he was a guy, obviously, that we get kind of lost in the mocks a little bit. Everybody's thinking he would have been a good, second round pick. Yeah. And you're like, okay, all right, let me kind of get, wrap my head around this a little bit, come to grips with it. But then, I woke up Friday and I'm like, you know what, man? Like, this team got better. This team got some dudes that are going to come in day one and hopefully be impact players on this team. And, when you start to piece together, not the whole draft, right? All 7 rounds, when you start to hear Brad Holmes talk a little bit, when you see the reactions, when you see the corresponding moves, right? Trading DeAndre Swift to Philly, which I know we'll get to in a little bit, you start to understand the bigger picture a little bit better, right? So I was certainly one of those guys. I'm guilty of it. Thursday night, I went through a little period where I'm like, man, running back, man, like this, there's so many other positions that this team needs to address. But then you look at it and you say, maybe this draft was just really, really weird, where teams felt like maybe there were 10, maybe 15 guys with legit first-round grades on them. And we know basically by Brad Holmes' reaction in the draft when they were able to get Gibbs that they had an incredibly high grade on him. And then you hear, if they couldn't have traded out of that 6th pick, they would have been comfortable taking him there. So I kind of put that all together and I say, you know what? The bottom line is I think this is a team that understands and believes they're ready to win now, okay? Because if you look at it, just call it what it is. If a team like, Buffalo or Kansas City or Philadelphia or San Francisco picks a running back in the first round, you know what everybody's saying? Oh, my God, this team just got so much better. Oh, man, they're just keep adding more playmakers, right? But when we do it, it's like, whoa, you don't take a run. You know what I mean? So it's kind of different there. But that to me, that should let all of us know that this team believes that they're in a great spot to win now, right? And they just added another, hopefully, dynamic piece to this already, explosive offense, a guy that can hopefully make the loss of Jameson Williams throughout those first 6 games a little bit easier. But the bottom line is, man, and I think with all their picks, they got better. Yep. They got better. Hooker, now, Hendon Hooker was an interesting one, right? I think it was pretty clear that they wanted to address the quarterback position at some point. I know that we're not going to expect him to come in and be a starter certainly this year, maybe even next year.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, I got to let everybody know, as soon as they took Hendon Hooker, my phone blew up by one TJ Lang saying, hey, where's the audio when I said we're going to take a mid-round draft pick, a quarterback? Anybody can fit into this offense. Is quarterback friendly. I mean, you must have broke your shoulder trying to pat yourself on the back.
I mean, we hit so many scenarios. I can't take credit for being directly right on that. I mean, we talked about taking one at 6. We talked about taking one, in the middle rounds. Hendon Hooker to me is a guy that I think clearly, they're trying to get a little bit more athletic at that position. They take him, who's a really good athlete. They sign, and look, I know Adrian Martinez probably has a very low percentage shot of making this team, but he was a guy in college, obviously very gifted athlete running. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, they went down that path of trying to add a little bit more speed, at least to that backup position. I will say, though, I think that, when that draft Thursday night came, to be honest with you, the first 5 picks, I think were probably, and I'm not going to say this in a negative tone, but I think they played out probably the worst case for the Lions.
Well, now hold on a second.
I'm not going to say worst case as they had to settle, but I think that they had extremely high grades. They knew they weren't getting Bryce Young, right? We can scratch that off the board, but they had extremely high grades on the next 4 guys that went. And if one of those guys was sitting there, who knew that, Houston was going to grab CJ Stroud and then move back up, right? We didn't know that was kind of the domino. We knew Arizona was going to try to move around. We all thought it was going to be for one of those quarterback hungry teams that wants to bounce up and bounce some of these guys back. They had extremely high grades on Witherspoon, Stroud, obviously Will Anderson, Anthony Richardson. I don't know. I mean, if he was still on the board there at 6, I don't think he would have been the pick, but if Stroud, Anderson, Witherspoon would have been there, I don't think we would have saw that trade back because they had extremely high grades on 3 of those guys. And when they said, you know what, Stroud didn't fall, Stroud ended up going number 2. Now we have to pivot a little bit between, hey, let's take the quarterback position, kind of put on the back burner, and let's give the guy we have now, Jared Goff, as many weapons as possible to succeed on offense. That's why I think they went out and got Jahmyr Gibbs at 12.
So, I mean, I didn't think it played out as bad as you did. In terms of Brad Holmes' draft board, maybe it did. If they really wanted Witherspoon, I don't know anybody thought that Seattle was going to take Witherspoon.
No.
At 5. So when I saw 3 quarterbacks, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson go in the top 5, and Will Anderson was gone, to me, in my mind, that left Tyree Wilson or Jalen Carter. And a lot of people believed that Seattle was going to take Jalen Carter, so Tyree Wilson was going to be there. Either way, we were going to have a pick of one of those guys. And then they traded out of that 6th pick. Your reaction when, and I know you didn't think that they were going to be in the Jalen Carter camp, that he was clearly off their board, but were you surprised that with Tyree Wilson there that they didn't go with him?
No, because I started to hear a little bit of rumblings the day of
foot injury.
I think there were more concerns than anything that had been leaked out to the public or leaked out to the media. I think that, and I don't know the details.
Yeah.
I think that there were, but from my understanding, I think there was a very high concern about that possible foot injury and the recovery, and there were just some weird things going on there. And maybe a few other things. I don't want to, I'm not here to try to rip anybody down, but I think there were a little bit more question marks around Tyree Wilson than anything that we were able to read or anything that came out in the media. So, look, the guy was still, in my opinion, still a hell of a player. Obviously, there were a lot of teams that felt that way because, he went from being mocked as high as 2 over Will Anderson to, he didn't fall dramatically, but, going down to 7. I think even the Raiders probably took a little bit of a chance on him based off of just his athletic ability. But I wasn't surprised that the Lions weren't considering him just based off of, there was high concern there, along with, I don't think the same concern with Jalen Carter, but high enough concern to where they didn't want to invest that high of a pick into a guy that had some question marks around him.
But then you look and you say, okay, well, they trade back, and every year, I know you and I value picks. Last year, it seemed like it was a no-brainer, right? You were either going to take Hutch or Thibodeau or Walker. But in most drafts, because the Lions have been drafting in the top 5 or top 10 frequently, it was, hey, trade back, get as much draft capital. And the argument is always you've got to have somebody that wants to trade up. Well, in the 1 year where I wanted them to take a player, for me, it was Jalen Carter. They end up trading back with the Arizona Cardinals to 12. And I was okay with that trading back, I didn't like it that they traded out of the top 10, but again, you've got to have somebody that's willing to move up. They found the Cardinals were, but then you get Jahmyr Gibbs, which was a surprise. Not that he was necessarily a first-round pick, but that he went as high as 12. And you mentioned it earlier. Jack Campbell went 18. The Lions' second pick. Sam Laporta went 34. A couple of picks into the second round. Now that we'll talk about the individuals in just a minute. Now that you've seen, especially the first two rounds of the Lions, and to round it out, it's Brian Branch, who I think was a great steal, was a 14 picks into the second round.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts on just the potential of having 4 starters, early on starters, whether Branch starts as a rookie at any point. I think he'll eventually work his way into that role. Sam Laporta, I think, will start. I think the other two guys are able to find starting roles as well. But the quality of draft, and you mentioned the Lions clearly are in the camp of, hey, we can win now, and we can win big now with Jared Goff, with this offensive line. The value of getting 4 starters in a draft that might start as rookies.
Yeah, honestly, I think anything less would be disappointing, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean,
now look, I know those are
I don't know that you expect second-round picks to immediately come in and start.
I'm not going to expect Brian Branch to, only because we know that they just signed 3 guys to fill those needs, right? Brian Branch, to me, is a guy that, like you said, he's going to come in and probably be a rotational guy at first. But this wasn't about – I don't think this pick was about this year, right? This was about the future. And we love the signings that they made with Mosley and with Sutton and with Gardner Johnson. But the reality is, who's their top 4 defensive backs right now? 3 of them are going to be on their last year of their deal, right?
Yeah.
And I'm throwing Jerry Jacobs in there as well. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time, whether it be inside or outside in that the slot position or outside corner. He's going to be a free agent after this year. Gardner Johnson's on a 1-year deal. Mosley's on a 1-year deal, right? So you have to you had to find somebody that you could lock down for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
You can't just keep going 1-year deals with everybody. So it's unfair for me to say I expect Brian Branch to come in and be a day 1 starter. That's not what I'm saying. But when you talk about Laporta and you talk about that tight end room, is it unfair to say, okay, he should probably beat out Brock Wright, or at least the number 2, tight end on the roster right now, whether it's Zylstra or whether it's Mitchell? I expect him to be better than those guys, right? I think anything less than that, and maybe it takes a little bit of time. Maybe it takes, until week 4, 5, 6 for him to really grow into it and start becoming a focal point of this offense. But guys in the first round, I expect Jack Campbell to be a day 1 starter.
Mm-hmm.
I expect Jahmyr Gibbs to be a day 1 starter. And I know running backs are going to rotate, so I'm not going to freak out if Montgomery's getting the first snaps of the game and then he comes in, but he's going to be a very valuable piece of this offense. I think anything less than having 3 of those guys come in and, from day 1 be like, you're obviously going to have to earn it. These coaches aren't going to hand you anything, but these are high draft picks. And I expect Laporta, pick 34? That's almost an extension of the first round almost, right? So
yeah,
at least 3 of those guys you expect to come in and contribute day 1. Now, the question is, that linebacker room, right? We obviously know that Rodriguez is going into his second year. Everybody loved him last year. They just re-signed Anzalone to a 3-year deal. Where is Jack Campbell going to fit in that mix? Whose spot is he going to take? Because let's be honest, 60 to 70% of the snaps you play on defense are in sub or nickel or dime, whatever you want to call it, with more defensive backs on the field and only 2 linebackers, right? I think obviously we could say, hey, 4-3, those are probably going to be your 3 guys. But when you go to nickel, how is that rotation going to fill out? Good thing is anytime you add a premier young player, the competition is going to raise in that group. Guys like Rodriguez, guys even like Anzalone are going to understand they're going to have to be a whole lot better than they were last year if they want to keep playing on the field, because Jack Campbell is that type of player that can come in day 1 and take your spot if you're not working hard for it.
I think it's, to me, just looking at the skill set, Anzalone is somewhat limited in coverage. You've got Rodrigo, who's a former defensive back, converted to linebacker. He's probably going to be in that. His skill set is more of I can cover some guys. Yeah, he could fill some holes, but His size, his skill set, his speed, his reactionary speed, I thought was really good last year. And his awareness and his knowledge of what's going on in the secondary. And then Jack Campbell, I mean, we hear about this freakish athlete, right? Grades is one of the best athletic scores coming out of the combine. I got to imagine that he's going to be a part of that as well, because what we've seen now, especially when you start talking about playoff teams, one of the things that they have and that they utilize in the nickel package is they'll feature their tight ends.
Yeah.
This is a guy that can match up with tight ends. I don't know if he can match up with Kittle. I don't know if he can match up with Kelsey, but of the guys that are on the roster, he gives you the best chance.
Yeah. Now, does it give you any concern? Because this is the first thing I thought of, to be honest with you, when they drafted a tight end, was kind of like, oh no, like we saw what this offense was with a supposed, focal tight end with Hawkinson, right?
Yeah.
Obviously Hawkinson got traded, and we all remembered what happened the rest of the year. They went 8-2, and it was like, okay, hey, the offense is pretty damn good when you're not trying to force the ball to a tight end or make the tight end the focal point of your scheme. I think that look, I didn't watch a lot of Sam Laporta in college, but just over the weekend, obviously watching some highlights. The one thing that kind of stood out about him was he can do a lot after the catch.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's something that I think a guy like Hawkinson really didn't have. He would kind of catch the ball, fall down, or catch the ball, tackle. But I just don't want them to try to force the tight end position to be a huge focal point like it was in the first half of last year, because we saw that kind of threw out the scheme a little bit. We saw that was kind of Jared Goff's security blanket. Anytime it's a third down, I'm looking for the tight end, right? If they try to do the same things again, we already saw that it didn't work out. So I hope Laporta can come in and be a nice complementary piece. But the one thing about him that I will say is I hope he turns out to be a really good run blocker, right? Because I know that a guy that we all loved and kind of talked about and were enamored with at the tight end spot was that kid from Georgia,
Darnell
Washington, 6'7", 280.
Biggest number zero I've ever seen.
He was like having a six offensive lineman out
Right.
there. That guy was a mauler in the run game. He was the guy that I kind of wanted, just so you don't have to run so many of those extra tackle packages, right? You can open up the more scheme, more flexibility within personnel groups, having a guy like that. So if Laporta can come in and earn his keep at first, at least being a run blocker, and then develop into one of those guys that can be a threat in the middle of the field, I obviously trust Ben Johnson to make sure that he gets it right with those guys.
Here's the difference I saw at the end of the first or end of the season last year, when the Lions were having more success, was one, obviously defensive side of the ball played better. That has no impact on the tight end,
right?
Other than situations that you're in and not always playing from behind. But the Lions were a lot healthier at the end of the year. DJ Shark missed some time at the beginning of the year. And even though Jameson Williams didn't have an impact at the end of the year, at least he was on the field running some routes. Amon-Ra St. Brown was dinged up a little bit middle of the season, played healthy at the end of the year.
Swift was out for a while,
Yeah, and so really the only one that wasn't dinged up was TJ Hawkinson. Now all of a sudden he's traded, everybody else gets a little bit healthier, and the tight end was still a big part of the offense, but it wasn't the focal point, but it didn't have to be. So
right.
I think as long as Ben Johnson, and I do believe that Ben Johnson isn't going to make Laporta the focus of this offense. They're going to have other weapons that they're going to utilize early on. I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but he may be forced into catching some more balls just because you're not going to have Jameson Williams. But now all of a sudden you got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's not only you're going to have Montgomery in the backfield. You can use Gibbs as a slot receiver. You can run him out of the backfield and throw him the ball. It gives you another weapon to take attention off of your tight end, or your tight end takes attention off him or St. Brown. Like, they have the ability to spread the ball around, and it's really going to be a matter of Ben Johnson's scheme and Jared Goff's eyes.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think, look, Jared Goff took a big enough step last year towards the end of the year to where we can start to realize he's that quarterback that when you give him new pieces, he's not going to try to force the ball to them. You're just adding more weapons to your arsenal and more situational ability to, find guys and make big plays. I think, look, we kind of hit those for top 4 picks. I just wanted to ask you real quick, the DeAndre Swift trade.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know the pick in 2 years from now, right? That's
2025. It's the 4th round pick.
4th round, right? Which we see 4th round, and you're kind of like, okay, I mean, 4th round ain't bad. It's 2 years from now, so you think the value is probably down a little bit. I kind of thought that there was a chance that to make that situation even better, you have Jahmyr Gibbs and obviously Dave Montgomery, but I thought maybe if you just keep DeAndre Swift and you get him motivated on a contract year, that could have been the first time that we would see his true potential. And now you could see a guy that, even if it's the trade deadline's like week 8, even if the first 6 games he's staying healthy and he's playing and he's dynamic, that would only kind of add to his, value as far as trade. I get it that Brad Holmes said, you know what, it's best for both sides. Obviously, they tried to make it easy for Swift and say, you know what, we got it, man. If we want to be assholes, we'll keep you here and run you into the ground until your contract's up. Obviously, they didn't want to do that. But part of me was like, man, I felt like even after they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm like, I think I would keep DeAndre Swift. I think I would. I think that I think this would be the first year where we would see that full potential because, like I just mentioned, you have a guy that's going to be more motivated than he's ever been in his 4 years of his career, right? He's been hurt. He was a 2nd round pick, a lot of high expectations, did a lot of really good things when he was on the field. His issue was obviously the injuries and just couldn't stay on the field. I thought this would have been the year where you could really have, and we know that they don't like just running 2 running backs, right? We know that they like running Justin Jackson coming in last year and Craig Reynolds and all these guys. I mean, they like having 4 or 5 different guys that they can kind of rotate and get in there. I just thought, man, I really would have liked to see DeAndre Swift fully motivated. I don't think that we saw that in his time here in Detroit.
I've been preaching the whole contract year all off season since they won in Green Bay. Everybody's like, hey, we need to move on from DeAndre Swift. I have been preaching in a contract year. I think he is going to be motivated. I think he is going to be a guy that plays with injuries that in the previous 3 years he probably wouldn't play with. Now Philly gets that upside, but it's the final year of his contract. And if he's not part of the solution long term, I don't think his value goes up going into the season and getting close to the trade deadline, because a team is only going to have him. They're only have him as a rental this year. I don't think Philly re-signs him. And so
no, they don't pay running backs.
No. So if you're going to have him as a rental, you want him for the whole season, not just for the last half of the season. And if you have him for the last half of the season, it's probably not a 4th. And it's probably, and part of that trade was swapping, 7th round picks, which is not a huge deal, but it's part of the deal.
Yeah.
But I do think going into the season, he was primed for a big year for motivation. But on the flip side, you're not going to get that value leading up to the trade deadline as much as you probably got for him. You're also going to be taking opportunities away from Jahmyr Gibbs, from Montgomery. And yeah, they like the platoon guys, but they've been platooning guys probably because they knew Swift couldn't handle carrying the ball 20 times a game, because whether it was, carrying the ball, catching the ball, like he can only take so many hits in a game. Now you've got a guy in Jahmyr Gibbs that, has proven throughout his time in Alabama. Now, doesn't mean anything in the NFL. He is a little bit undersized.
Yeah.
And in college football, he was bouncing off a lot of tacklers. I don't know that happens as much in the NFL. He's going to have to try and elude some more of those. But I would rather have him on the field and utilize his skill set along with Montgomery, along with whoever else they have in the backfield, than to have some of those stolen by, because you want to showcase Swift to hopefully trade him at the deadline.
Yeah. And look, I'm with you. I mean, obviously the major hope was, hey, if he looks great for the first 6 weeks, good 7 weeks, and, a playoff team, I don't know, their running back goes down and now you have a little bit of leverage, right? I get it. But at the end of the day, Brad Holmes said we did what was best for us. We did what was best for him and decided to move on. Now, here's the thing. I mean, we all love that, we all love draft picks. We all love guys that can come in. I mean, like you just kind of mentioned, there's no guarantee that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to stay healthy, right? We don't know. I mean, obviously that, his track record, he played a whole season at Alabama. Before that, I think he played, the whole season at Georgia Tech, I think was where he came from. But there's no guarantee with these guys, right? That's why, even the undrafted kid they got out of the running back, Ibrahim
Mo
from
Ibrahim,
Mo
had
Ibrahim
the
from.
Achilles a couple years ago.
I mean, he was a guy they picked up, undrafted free agent, out of Minnesota.
He's a banger
and
too. He's a big body.
He's a tough dude, man, and he's got a chance to make this team and make an impact on this team because they like rotating those guys so much. But I was excited with all the picks. I mean, the bottom line is, hey, you want to bitch about, value and all this, throw it out the window. Bottom line is they went out and targeted the guys that they thought were going to be impact players and thought that they were going to be special players on this team, fit the culture. We obviously saw that all that talk we had the last couple weeks about guys like Jalen Carter and, hey, are they going to take a chance? Where are they at? They still going to build off of character? Obviously, all those questions were answered. We know that they're still building this thing the same way that they were 2 years ago when they got here. And the bottom line is they got better. They got better. Now, the interesting thing will be probably a year from now, because I don't think it'll be interesting this year, but Hendon Hooker. You go out and get Hendon Hooker.
Is he the future at quarterback?
Best case scenario, yes. Best case scenario, Hendon Hooker can come in, and he said all the right things, right? He said that he wants to come in and learn under Jared Goff and pick his brain and, just try to sit and soak everything up, right? Nobody expects Hendon Hooker. I don't even know if he's going to be ready. I mean, didn't he tear his ACL in November?
Yeah, it was earlier than Jamison Williams did.
Yeah.
But who knows what his timetable is to be back on the field.
Who knows? So best case scenario this year, he comes in and he's able to maybe get ahead of the bell curve as far as being cleared and ready to go. And he's a really good backup, almost like a Teddy Bridgewater type, right? A guy that you can rely on, a guy that's, hey, now we don't have to panic anymore. Now we don't have to have that situation where if Jared Goff goes down, what's going to happen? Hopefully Hendon Hooker, best case scenario this year would be he's a guy that can come in and at least get you through a couple series or get you through a half or get you through a game if you need to, if he's healthy. Best case scenario moving forward, yeah, this guy looks like the real deal. This guy is athletic. He's fast. He's got a cannon for an arm. He's making all the reads. He's making all the throws. And guess what? In year 2, we're going with him. He's going to be our guy. And now you have – I know he was a third-round pick, so you don't have that 5-year window you would with a first-round pick, but now you could really have a 3-year window where you have a guy cheap, young, and young. He's like 26 already. But you get it. He's in his second year. And now you have incredible flexibility to not be handicapped by a hefty quarterback salary. And that's something that, John, I think teams are starting to take notice of this. I think teams are starting to get a little bit fed up with how out of control this quarterback market is getting. I think there was a reason we saw the record number of quarterbacks drafted this year.
Yeah.
I think it was 11 in the top, 140 picks alone, which was an all-time record. I think teams are starting to take notice that, hey, we're going to try to hit a lottery pick with one of these guys. So maybe we don't have to pay, one of these kind of middle quarterback, a Daniel Jones or a Ryan Tannehill or one of these guys, $45 million a year to. So I think the Lions were certainly one of those teams as well. And look, best case scenario, even better would be Jared Goff coming out and having an MVP type season, right? Mm-hmm. That would be best case scenario to where you can say, yes, this guy is our future. This guy is our franchise quarterback, right? We took a chance on Hendon Hooker, but you know what that did? It raised the competition for Jared Goff, and he's out there playing like he did the last 10 games last year, and maybe can work himself into a legitimate top 5 quarterback conversation. That would be best case scenario as well. So I think they're in a good spot, and I think that obviously, that was a position that they targeted, and they felt really good about being able to get Hendon Hooker in the 3rd round.
Later in the week, we're going to talk about the final 3 draft picks that the Detroit Lions had in the 3rd round. Broderick Martin, defensive tackle out of Western Kentucky. Colby Sorsdahl, offensive tackle out of William and Mary in the 5th round. And in the 7th round, the trade swap with the Philadelphia Eagles, Antoine Green out of North Carolina. We'll talk about those 3 guys a little bit more. We're going to do some more film on them, as well as the undrafted free agents, what they offer, what their chances are of making the team. Is a good crop of undrafted free agents that the Lions did sign. But that's coming up later in the week. But thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you in just a few days on Necessary Roughness.